Hello, hello, all you AP World historians out there. This is your AP World history teacher, Ben Osborne, and we're looking at Unit 3.2, Administration of Empires. Last time around, we talked quite a bit about sort of the basics of these empires, like kind of where they were, a couple of like famous people and stuff like that. Here we're going to talk more about sort of how they run these empires. These empires are huge. They're massive, right? So how are they going to be able to run, and how are they going to be able to do all this stuff? It's a good question. I think we're going to have to find out today how that exactly works. So let's get into it, okay? Starting off here with Russia. So we talked last time around about Ivan IV, or the Terrible, Le Terrible. One of the things that he is going to do to try to control his empire is try to control the boyars, okay? So the boyars are Russian aristocrats. So think about like in Britain or whatever, you have like barons and you have earls and dukes and all that, right? In Russia, those folks, they have sort of titles and stuff, but the collective title for them is boyars, okay? Basically, boyars defines as Russian aristocracy. That's all it really is. Okay, so one of the things that he is trying to do then, this is a old-fashioned conflict, right, between the aristocracy and central authority. So in order to try to put down the boyars, who are a little bit stronger there, he will confiscate their land, and he's going to create this crazy secret police called the Oprichnina, or the Oprichniki, is another name that you might hear. He's going to put them in place. These guys were amazing. They were like the Nazgul from Lord of the Rings. They wore like all black all the time, and they would go from like place to place and terrorize the boyars, and they could theoretically kill them if they thought something was going on. They could confiscate land to do that. So they ended up becoming this sort of like weird quasi-aristocracy that was under the control of Ivan IV. Eventually, they got a little too big for their britches, and he had them killed and got rid of them. So that's just one example, though, of how he's trying to control this group of people who are the aristocrats. He is unable to secure his succession. He actually kills his own son. Supposedly, he was having an affair with his daughter-in-law. It's just, one of those things about these royal families, right? And in the process, his son confronted him, and he beat him to death and was very, very upset about it. But what that means then is that his only son that was able to take over was not very effective. Like, I think the historians think perhaps he even had like a severe disability or something, like mental disability, which made it very difficult for him to take control. So when that falls apart, then it's going to lead to a war of succession and something known as the Time of Troubles. Now, I think this is a fascinating time period. I would love to tell you more about it, but we don't have a ton of time right now. I will just tell you this, that one of the potential people who was going to be one of the czars was a guy named Dmitri, but Dmitri was a kid when he died, right? However, he appeared again. Not really. So the Polish, who are unhappy with the Russians and wanted to kind of control that area, there's some guy named Dmitri who just sort of appears, and they declare him the Dmitri, like that he didn't actually die. And so there ends up being this war. And then when he dies, another guy comes about saying he's Dmitri. So sometimes this is known, parts of the Time of Troubles are known as the War of the False Dimitris, which is amazing. The Romanov dynasty then will take control in 1613, and they will be the dynasty until the end of the Russian Empire. Three groups had conflicting desires and agendas within Russia. The church wanted traditional values and beliefs, the boyars wanted to gain and hold power, and the royal family, or the czars, wanted to maintain control also. So they're kind of competing against each other. The royal family's working with the church on occasion, they're working with the boyars on occasion, they're all sort of working with each other and against each other to get their own needs. Eventually, we'll end up with Peter the Great. This is very close to the end of this time period. It's like the 17th century or so. And Peter the Great will become the great defender of orthodoxy. He will create provinces to help him rule efficiently. He's going to raise some taxes and compel workers to work in shipyards. It's kind of like urban serfdom, so kind of an unusual way to do things, but a very, very famous guy there. In Russia, then, you can see our different social groups. The majority of people in Russia in this period are the serfs, 84.9%. That's a lot. We have a few of these urban workers, people who are like working in the sailing industry or whatever under Peter the Great. We also then have some military, officials, priests, and then a tiny little bit there at the top of the nobility. So the boyars as well as the czar's family are very, very small parts of this whole thing. All right, let's talk about the Ottomans then. So the Ottomans have this system called the Devshirme. This is a selection system. They basically would go to parts of their empire where Christian boys were born, and they would recruit by force to serve in the Ottoman government. So it's kind of almost like a tax that they would take in parts of the Balkans, where they would find boys who are Christians, and they would take them with them. These boys were often groomed for administrative positions, scribes, tax collectors, diplomats, and they were indoctrinated to be fiercely loyal to the Sultan. They typically were converted to Islam as well. One of these groups of people, though, like those boys who are particularly, not athletic, I guess, but militarily oriented, I guess you'd say, are going to end up forming this group called the Janissaries. This is an elite force of the Ottoman army. These are slave soldiers. The Safavids will also have a similar system known as gulams. You may ask why, like if they're slave soldiers, right, they're slaves with guns, why don't they just do something about it? Sometimes they did, but generally speaking, they lived pretty good lives, and they were pretty heavily reliant upon the leaders of the Ottoman Empire. Like if they were to revolt or something, they would end up being put down and killed, so they kind of were forced to do this kind of activity as well. They weren't the only military force. They had other military forces as well. They also are going to do something called tax farming. Check out this. What they're going to basically do in the Ottoman Empire is they will levy taxes on peasants, but then they don't want to go to all the trouble of like actually collecting it themselves. So what they do instead then is they auction off the right to collect taxes in certain areas to individuals who are private individuals known as tax farmers, right? So the idea here would be like, let's say that the federal government today was like, hey, Osborne, people in Alabama owe, I don't know, $1 billion in taxes or whatever. So you can collect $1 billion in taxes if you pay us certain amounts of money. Usually less than the actual tax amount because I wouldn't make as much money off of it. Let's say I give them $900 million and I say, great, I'll collect all these taxes. Now it's my job to get these taxes. I have legal authority to do so, but I have to actually go out and do them, right? So I'm going to go collect all these taxes or whatever, and if I do well, I could make $100 million off of it to work well. Or I could make more, because you could also just fudge stuff, and they often did this. They would become pretty corrupt, they would skim money, and be pretty terrible people. The tax people, the peasants absolutely hated these guys. But it did benefit the Ottoman Empire in a lot of ways. They would get all their tax money basically up front, like at the beginning of the fiscal year. So that could be a real plus to actually doing it. Again, here's another little map here of the Ottoman Empire. We saw this in 3.1, but you can see here kind of the expansion of it, sort of where it comes from and how big it gets. The earliest part there, colors. Orange, I guess, yeah, some kind of orange there. That's the core of the Ottoman Empire, and then you'll see how it kind of expands. The map actually shows it kind of reversed, like the higher point of it in 1774, and then sort of as it shrinks over time, because it will shrink a lot over time. One of the most famous things here is the Süleymani Mosque in Istanbul. So we'll look at a couple of these here. One of the ways that the administration is going to work in these kingdoms is by creating powerful, like kind of art or architecture kind of places. Like, think about it. If you are kind of like, I don't know about this sultan. I don't know how powerful he is. I don't know if I should even listen to him, right? If you come to Istanbul and you see that the sultan built this amazing mosque, essentially the largest mosque in all of Christendom, I think you'd be pretty impressed, right? You'd be like, maybe this guy's got a little something. Maybe I should check it out. So one of the things we'll see in this period is this legitimization of power through art, which is what you're seeing here with this giant mosque. All right, look at the Mughals again. We got our good friend here, Akbar. Akbar was the most capable of the Mughal rulers. He established an efficient government and a system of fairly administered laws, so that's good. He will pay government officials called zamindars. These folks are in charge of specific duties. They often did construction, water supply work, but also taxation. This is a big factor for them too. They're not quite tax farmers, but the zamindars had a very similar kind of effect. They were there to collect taxes for the central government. They later were given tracts of land rather than pay, so they end up becoming an aristocracy, landed aristocracy as well. Eventually, they began building their own personal armies, which led to decline of central authority. These zamindars end up having money as well as land. They could pay people, so they're going to end up kind of creating small little armies of their own. That's never a good situation when you're trying to control things. You will probably know the most famous of the big art areas here, legitimizing power through art. That is the Taj Mahal, created by Akbar's son, Shah Jahan. So Shah Jahan created this as a mosque and a mausoleum for his wife, his loved wife, Mumtaz Mahal. And she is buried inside, as is he. And again, it's got a little bit of it's got a Muslim look to it, but also it is going to incorporate Hindu art as well, just sort of as an example of the combination of these things here. All right, let's take a look at Western Europe. Now, again, this is not exactly in our Gunpowder Empires kind of situation here, but it is an important section here because it takes place during this time period, and this is just where AP put it. So let's talk about it. First off, excuse me. Let's talk about England, okay? The Tudors are the main leaders of England during this period, the main family. I'm actually recording this in September of 2022. The Queen has just passed away a couple weeks ago, so this seems kind of relevant here. We'll talk a little bit about some of that family. But the Tudors are one of the most powerful families, or the powerful family in England. They are the kings and queens of England. And they will rely upon justices of the peace to try to maintain peace in the counties of England. These justices, again, will become one of the most important and powerful groups in the kingdom. Again, slightly different than the aristocracy. They're more under the control of the king. Under the Tudors, the power of the feudal lords will weaken, but we are going to end up having a different check upon the monarch, which is the parliament. We're going to be getting into this idea of absolutism versus constitutionalism. The king is either an absolute power, which we'll see in France in a second, or in England, the king has a lot of power, but they can be checked by the parliament and by laws themselves. In 1689, for example, the English Bill of Rights was created. These were things that every English, really more like gentry or like, powerful people, but every basic powerful English person has rights to, so they can't just be treated poorly by the king. This tension between the power of the monarchy, the power of the aristocrats will become very important very, very soon. We will have a couple of conflicts in England over these very simple issues. All right, now this is kind of small up here, so it's going to be difficult to see, but these are our Tudors. Hello, Tudors. You probably have heard of a number of these people. The Tudors are very famous for their major people, their big kings and stuff like that. So if you look all the way up there at the top, you'll see Henry VII of England with Elizabeth of York. This is the creation of the Tudors, Henry VII being the king. Then, if you go down a little and go all the way, which way is it? The other way. If you go all the way that way to the other end, you'll see a guy named Arthur, Prince of Wales. That was the initial person who was supposed to take over. Arthur, however, dies, and his younger brother, Henry VIII, will become the new king of England. And of course, you know all about his wives, 6 wives, right? But he's got a couple of kids out of all those 6 wives there. He actually was married to his sister-in-law, Catherine of Aragon, so that's strange. We got Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, and Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr, his last wife. But out of that, then, he is going to end up having a couple of daughters. Mary I of England is the oldest, then Elizabeth I of England, then lastly, Edward VI. Now, Edward VI does become the king of England after Henry VIII, but he is young, and he's also kind of sickly, and so he will die during his reign, pretty young. And then the question becomes, well, who's going to take over? Well, they want like a male heir, but they just don't really have one that's close enough. So they go with Mary I. But it's problematic. She is married to Philip II of Spain. She's also a Catholic. They don't love that. So eventually she is gotten rid of, essentially, and Elizabeth I of England will take over control. Now, the problem, though, here is Elizabeth I never marries and never has any children. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do now, right? Who's going to be in charge? Well, if you go back up to the top, then you'll see Henry VII of England, Elizabeth of York. You can see they have other children. And so from those other children, they will have a number of different people there. And you will go all the way down to the bottom, and you're going to see James VI of Scotland and First of England. So James VI was the King of Scotland, but because he had claim to the throne of England, he will become James I of England. That is part of the unification. They aren't like one crown, but it's like 2 crowns, 2 countries, and they will be in charge of each other. The king will be in charge of both of those. Now, you may ask, where is like Elizabeth and her family and all this? Elizabeth, now Charles III, the new king, they are Windsors, okay? So they are not members of the Tudor family because, again, the Tudor family dies out with Elizabeth. So the next king, James VI of Scotland and the First of England, is known as a Stuart king. And you can see that there, right above there. His family was called Henry Stuart, right? So that's where the name comes from. There's a couple Stuarts up in there. So they will become the new kings. They will last for a little while. Then, I'm not going to go into all the details, but then they're going to bring in another family. Then they'll bring in another family. Then they'll bring in these Germans for a while. It's really complicated. There's a whole bunch of people that are going to go through and they're going to have problems with, until eventually they end up having the family that is related to her. There's a German princess basically who comes in, who was never the queen, but her son was the king, and that's where they descend down from after that. So again, that's for another video if you really want to check it out, or check it out on your own because it's a little bit on the complicated side. All right. Western Europe then continued here. We got France. Their rule was more absolute there than in England. One source of power with complete authority is the idea of absolutism. This is going to begin with Henry IV from 1589 to 1610, but it will really become powerful under his sons and grandson. This is Louis XIII, who will move towards even greater centralization. He has these guys called intendants. They were royal officials or bureaucratic elites that were sent out to the provinces to execute the orders of the central government. In other words, a way for him to keep control of these places by sending people out. They're sometimes called tax farmers because that's part of their duty, but it's not quite the same as the Ottoman tax farmers. Louis XIV was basically a dictator then. You probably have heard of him. He's the famous Sun King. He will build Versailles, and he will use the idea of what's called the theater state to maintain control. He'll basically force people to come in and stay at Versailles, and he will have all these parties and stuff, and that's one of the ways that he's able to keep control of folks. This whole idea of absolutism versus constitutionalism will become even more important in the near future. Check that bad boy out. That's him. That's Louis XIV, the Sun King himself. He loved wearing fun outfits. I mean, who doesn't really? You look good, you feel good. All right. Legitimizing power through art. We got Versailles Palace up there on the top left. Beautiful place. If you get to France, you should check it out. One of my favorite parts of Versailles Palace is this place, the Hameau de la Reine. Okay, this is a hamlet of the Rhine or Rhine River. What this is basically is that when Louis XVI is here, his wife Marie Antoinette, who we'll talk about when we get to the French Revolution, she built this little tiny village in the back. It's like a little fun village for her. So she would go there and pretend to be a milkmaid, and they would have like cows and sheep and stuff. I swear this is true. It was like she was cosplaying as a peasant or something. It's pretty great. But it still exists. The parts of it have burned down, but most of it's still there, and you can go check it out. So don't miss it if you get a chance to go. All right, a couple of other things real quick, just this little bit here, other areas of Japan. We didn't talk about Japan in 3.1 because it's not really there, but let's talk about it real quick. Japan, not a huge player in this period, mostly limited to 3 of their 4 islands that they have today, but they have a unique situation for administration of their empire. So military leaders called shoguns will rule Japan in the emperor's name in the 12th to 15th century. The idea is that the emperor, they believe, is a god, essentially, and so he shouldn't be like concerning himself with day-to-day affairs. That's the job of his workers or whatever to do instead. So instead, they had these groups called daimyo that were landholding aristocrats, and they helped support the shoguns, who were the leaders of the country. They essentially were ruling the country for the emperor. It's kind of like, the Parliament and Queen Elizabeth, I guess, or now King Charles, because they don't do a whole lot, but it's even more than that. Each had an army of warriors, which is called samurai, and they also had ambition to conquer more territory and power to rule their land as they saw fit. So what happens then is that they kind of fall apart. The whole government falls apart. There's a series of wars that are known as the Sengoku Jidai, or the Warring States period. 3 powerful daimyo, Oda Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, what's his first name? Hideyoshi Hidetomi? Yeah. And then this guy, Tokugawa Ieyasu, are going to basically unify Japan together, and Ieyasu is the last one to really do so. So he is the daimyo, or the ruler around Tokyo, and he's the final leader of those 3. His successors, the Tokugawa clan, will rule Japan until the mid-1800s. This is known as the period of Great Peace. It comes at a consequence, though, which is that they become very technologically backward. This is known as the Tokugawa shogunate. He reorganized the governments of Japan to centralize control. It is functionally a feudal system, and it will help him to keep control of other daimyos. He had this idea called the alternate attendance system, where basically you spend a year in your province, right? And then you spend a year in Tokyo. So if you're in your provinces, then if you're only there a year, you can't really organize resistance, right? And then if you're in Tokyo, you also can't organize resistance. So you're basically kind of breaking up your time between these 2 different places when you're not able to cause the daimyo or the shogun a whole lot of problems. All right, folks, that's what we got for 3.2 Administration of Empires. Hope that was helpful to you, and I will see you next time for 3.3 and beyond. See y'all later. Bye-bye.